Prime Minister Narendra Modi held a cross-party meeting today to propose simultaneous elections to the Lok Sabha and state assemblies. The first 4 general elections held in India were simultaneous, but then on, early dissolution of the Lok Sabha or state assemblies has led to a scattered schedule. Is there merit in such a proposal? What hurdles are likely to arise? Joining us to talk about that is former Chief Election Commissioner O.P. Rawat, who as an election commissioner back in 2015 had considered such a previous proposal by the Modi government. Mr. Rawat, in principle, where do you stand on this proposal?
Actually, Election Commission had furnished all the suggestions to the government that whatever constitutional amendment and amendment to RP Act are required, once those amendments are made, adequate provision is made for procuring a necessary number of electronic voting machines and VVPATs, and adequate arrangement for providing central paramilitary force and polling personnel are there in place. Election Commission can deliver simultaneous election without any problem. But since the initial requirement of amendment to the Constitution and RP Act was not in place, Election Commission continued holding elections to legislative assemblies and parliament as and when these became due under the existing law.
Could you help us understand what specific parts of the Constitution would need to be amended and what amendments would need to come into the Representations of People's Act?
These concern the term of the houses for Lok Sabha, for Vidhan Sabha, and under RP Act, the mandate to Election Commission that whenever the term of a house is ending, Election Commission has to start the process of conducting elections 6 months before that date. So that is what is needed to be amended to begin with. But then there are eventualities that midway again some assembly may be dissolved or some no confidence motion may come and government may go. All those eventualities were visualized by Election Commission and appropriate suggestions were made for making necessary amendments even to cater to those eventualities.
I want to come to those in just a bit one by one, because what you raised, and we want to know what those suggestions were, because those are situations hypothetically that will arise. The first of those, what will happen to the life or tenure of assemblies that even right now currently at complete variance to the Lok Sabha? Take Bihar, which is about a year and a half off, Karnataka, which is 2 years away from the Lok Sabha cycle. Were there to be a desired convergence, how would state governments accept an early dissolution of an assembly, or do they go into suspended animation for a prolonged period of time?
Actually, that is why Election Commission had recommended that there should be a process to bring all parties on board, a consensus among all political parties, so that whatever dispensation is agreed to with consensus, according to that dispensation, the necessary amendment should be made so that there is no hitch.
Okay, a second situation, in the event of perhaps this happening, that you start off with assembly elections happening together along with Lok Sabha elections. Thereon, after that, in the event of a slightly fractured mandate in a state and a grouping not being able to hold majority for a full tenure, a government falls, the rival grouping is unable to gather a majority either. What did you all propose? What happens in such a situation? What happens for the rest of the life of such an assembly?
Commission proposed that in case of no confidence, we should amend the law to make it mandatory that along with no confidence, you will bring a confidence motion as to which kind of government will be hoisted after the present government falls, so that there is no vacuum and no need of an election. But because of other reasons, if the assembly gets dissolved, then Commission had proposed that if the assembly or the government has already lived for more than half of its tenure, then there may be some arrangement which is agreed to by all political parties and the state governor. That kind of government can be installed. But if the assembly and the government had not lived for more than half the tenure, then there may be a provision to hold election for the limited period so that again the assembly comes in sync with the other other assemblies and parliament.
Okay, I want to split both of those 2 points you made one by one. The first is an arrangement that parties could come to. What shape would you likely see that take?
I couldn't get your question.
So the 2 points you made that were made as suggestions, that if it has lived past the halfway mark, that
Yes,
an arrangement is found. In your suggestions, did you suggest what shape such an arrangement could take? Is this a political arrangement? Is this an administrative arrangement that would rest with the governor? Was there deliberation that happened on that?
No deliberation. It was just a suggestion by the Election Commission to the government that in that case, the governor can call all the representative parties in the House and find a formulation for installing a government for the remaining period.
Okay.
Suppose that fails, then I think whatever solution all party meeting and the consensus decides, that should be implemented.
The second part of this, where you said if it is for less than half, then a proposal made that an election be held for the remainder of that tenure. In the spirit of a government being elected, in the event of any government being elected for as long as it should be, and cycles in this country have been 5 years, would that be something that you find politically palatable, that a government comes in after an election is told you have only a 2-year mandate, for example?
If a government comes and falls before 2.5 years, then fresh election will be held for remaining tenure of the House so that it remains in sync.
No, I know, but I'm saying, is that something that you see being agreed to by the stakeholders in this, not just the political parties that are involved in this, also other stakeholders within those that contribute to the political process and the spirit of the Constitution? The idea that a government comes in for a tenure that is limited, is that something that you think will appear palatable to those that would find this agreeable at all?
I can't really predict whether it will be palatable to all parties or not.
Okay.
But it is the people who are the sovereign in this country. And if people want something, it will be done. And everybody will have to accept it.
Okay. Two more specific examples. In 2010, the United Kingdom passed the Fixed Term Parliament Act, after which the most recent election held in 2017 would require a 2/3 vote in the House of Commons for an early election to be held. That in sort took away something that had remained in Britain for very long, and in India the prerogative of a Prime Minister or a Chief Minister, the prerogative of the Chief Executive of a state to call elections as and when they deem fit. Do you think time has come to review that unofficial power that rests in those offices?
No, actually that power rests in the Election Commission, not in the executive or political executive.
But let me, okay, fair enough. In the Election Commission saying, okay, it is deemed time to hold an election, but in that case, let me take you back to recent examples, right? Telangana, they decided to dissolve the assembly early. You had back 15 years ago, Mr. Vajpayee deciding that he wanted to hold elections early. The time period taken ended up being closer to the full 5 years than he desired to be. But you've had chief executives of the state and the centre calling time on wanting to hold elections when they deem fit. So while the Election Commission deems that this is the right time, that everything is ready, the broader schedule of which has been decided by those governments that say, now we've done time on this life of this government and we want to go to the people again.
Actually, that is where the amendments will help.
Right.
That whether this kind of dissolution has taken place, Election Commission can always decide that no, it will be in the synchronization with the remaining polls, and for the remaining period in the assembly, they can have governor's rule or whatever is provided for by the Constitution.
Okay. In a situation like again, we have one slightly live situation like this right now. In Jammu and Kashmir, we've had a situation where a previous government fell because one of the two parties that was in an alliance stepped out. There was a brief attempt made to form another coalition, but at that point the governor of the state recommended central rule. In a situation like that, we've gotten to many months into that particular year. Is it desirable that a state remains without political leadership for a particular period of time just so that it meets a particular cycle?
Actually, this election could not be held because of other reasons.
Okay.
The law and order situation on the ground and election commission's assessment about the feasibility of holding elections.
No. So I just took J&K as an example to say, and again, we've had periods in the past because of law and order and other instances where states have remained under 356 and other governor's rule. That phase has by and large passed. That was the 80s and the 90s that we saw a lot of. A large part of this country today has gotten around to the fact that however unstable governments might be, let elections happen and let elected representatives, whoever they are, come forth and fresh governments be formed. For the sake of a cycle, if there were to be a year and a half without political leadership, is that something that for the sake of costs, something that should be jettisoned? The fact that unrepresentative administration happens in a state for close to a year, is that desirable?
Actually, it is not the matter of cost. Cost is a material.
Okay.
And if all political parties decide that not for a day there should be a non-representative government, they can amend the law accordingly.
Okay.
Who stops them?
Fair enough. When we spoke to you on this, outside this show, you also believe that other electoral reforms need to be moved along with such a proposal. Could you enumerate some of those that you'd like to see done?
Certainly. In fact, two reforms are direly needed in our elections. First is abuse of money to prevent it. That is very important, and a lot of suggestions have been made by the Election Commission. Some suggestions came in all political party meeting also. Those suggestions need to be implemented so that this abuse of money goes away, because it is one of the points because of which elections in India are suffering on this global election integrity index. So we must do something on that. Second is about the social media and use of big data analytics, profiling and targeted social media communication to change the mind of the voters. Because you might be seeing globally that one referendum result is still, is in the works, and 2 prime ministers have gone. So those kind of things need to be prevented in our country, and for that system has to be brought in. These 2 reforms are very much needed. Besides that, the criminalization of politics, entry of criminal elements by way of elections into the houses of parliament and assembly, that also needs to be looked into on priority, and some effective measures need to be taken.
Short of those happening as reforms spearheaded within the House by a government as well, what next do you think the Election Commission, short of that being legislated, what can the Election Commission do here on? We've had a general election in the last many weeks to step in on that and curb some of that influence on its own. Do you think there are learnings from this election cycle that need to be taken forward?
Whatever Election Commission and other constitutional authorities can do on their own is already in place. In fact, for social media, Election Commission has done a lot. For abuse of money, Election Commission countermanded quite a few elections. In fact, in Lok Sabha election also, one of the election in Tamil Nadu was deferred in Vellore. So whatever could be done within the existing legal framework, Election Commission and other constitutional authorities are doing their bit.
All right, I'll end this with a slightly political question. As those who've been opposed to a move towards simultaneous elections in principle have argued that it tends to benefit one side or the other, those that hold power largely either at the center or have a strong base in states. What would you say to those who find this an unpalatable idea in principle?
Actually, they should bring some empirical evidence to that, because empirical evidence is pointing other way. Like in Lok Sabha election, if you see Odisha verdict, in Lok Sabha, mandate is to some other party, and in Vidhan Sabha, 2/3 majority to the regional party. Same thing in the country, if you see, Tamil Nadu result, Kerala result for Lok Sabha is entirely different than the other states. So this is not really supported by empirical evidence. If they have empirical evidence, yes, they should bring it on the table, and then it should be considered.
All right, Mr. Rawat, thank you for making time and explaining the deliberations that have happened on this issue and the conversation with the government on the same. If you have been watching, thank you.
Thank you.